Oral stimulation of man, penis. Oral stimulation of woman, vulva, clitoris. If God who loves us, God in human form, gave us this outline, and in that outline, the person who really loves us says, if you look at a person, think about a person, in order to get aroused by them, you are already committing adultery with them. You are already working against a beautiful marriage vow. So this is important to you. If we are actually living as a family who's delighted to follow the instructions in the Sermon on the Mount, if we're excited about that, if we're happy about following those guidelines, then a father, the namer, the man, the one whose voice leads the family, a father ought to be able to talk about all these various things. Number one, if you share arousal with someone who you are not in covenant with, you are in danger of inviting in spirit powers. You are in danger of inviting in unclean spirits that may cause you to repetitively get stuck in behavior that is actually not really good for your future, for your soul. I often say that nobody spoke to me about the mechanics of the spirit realm. No one gave me a clear picture of the sorts of ways that you can invite in unclean spirits to get some power over your behavior. So, in doing layers and layers of research, I discovered a fascinating thing in the Hebrew marriage and relationship writings. There's a thing called Hashat Zerah. Hashat Zerah is unnecessary spilling of seed. And that's a very interesting statement, because clearly in Leviticus 15, it is not a sin for a man to release his seed. However, there is the concept of unnecessary releasing of seed. So, here we are as a family, and we really care about one another's lives. And we're checking in at communion time and admitting our faults, even the ways that we might be obsessed or caught in repetitive habits or behaviors that are not so good. So, being able to speak and converse in a calm and peaceable way about some of these practices is a good thing. It's part of your life. As a matter of fact, if the new covenant has this peculiar and wonderful aspect of an option of choosing to be single like Jesus, if it's a real great benefit to be single like Jesus, then I like to say we should describe the amusement park. We should describe the ride of the marriage bed in a way that's simple and calm, and converse about all of the pleasures and benefits in a way that is not exciting and titillating, but just realistic. If you look at the mammal world, you'll notice that in the world of mammals, only the human beings are in a state of intercourse face to face, where their eyes are together and their voices are together and they're smiling face to face. It's a face to face situation. All of the other mammals enter from behind, and they are not face to face. That's fascinating. And one of the great things about the human intercourse is that even though your body is different from the body of the other gender, you can see that what you are giving with your body is remarkably fascinating. You can see that your person is enjoying what you're giving, and they can see that you are enjoying what they are giving, and it's such a marvelous exchange. But if we are all told as a family that greater things, God has greater things in store when the next realm is opened up, greater things, greater pleasures than all of the pleasures that can be received in this current lifetime. So it's a fascinating thing to be able to say, okay, well, basically understand this. You've got either singleness like Jesus, or you've got the wonderful marriage bed that you're designed for. Your body is designed to be enjoyed. And Yeshua actually designed the pleasure himself as the architect by God's side, but he did not choose to enjoy that experience. Rather, he went forward in his singleness to touch as many people's lives as possible in his lifespan. So it's a remarkable thing to consider having a calm, honorable, Mr. Rogers explanatory description of the wonderfulness and the satisfaction of having your own person to enjoy. And if you have children that you want to follow the Holy Spirit and do precisely what he says, especially around the issue of singleness and selecting the marriage bed, if you understand the value of these things, then an explanation is very helpful, because the young person can think, wow, I bet that is really wonderful, and I can think about that. But if I actually choose to walk in my singleness and enjoy my singleness, there are unimaginable benefits that will come to me. So you can imagine the goodness of the marriage bed, but if you walk in singleness, there is an unimaginable wonderfulness that can come to you. Now, in my personal experience, there's the Bethel kid. There was a young man who was told kindly by his parents, as you're growing up, you do not have to pay attention to your penis when it comes erect. It's just a muscle. You don't have to do anything with it. You can just ignore it if it gets big. And this young man followed that practice and did not stimulate himself for many, many, many years. Now that's kind of fascinating to me because my life was punctuated by oral stimulation from friends when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, and I at that point discovered how wonderful the arousal feels. So this fellow never stimulated. He just remained quiet. But then after he got married, he discovered that when he enjoyed the marriage bed pleasure a lot, he found it almost irresistible. He found that he was motivated to stimulate himself after he had awakened the love, the passion, the desire, the obsessive habit of being aroused. He was stuck. He was discovering just how intense it is when you're familiar with this stimulation, whether it's oral or however else. So that was a great story, and it made me ponder life in the way that I didn't have it, because I was introduced to the stimulation when I was about 6 years old. So that's one thing. And then another thing is, in my own personal life, after sharing arousal with many people various times, I was in a marriage, and God was invited into that marriage, and I discovered that even though in the past oral stimulation seemed like a really important part of the physical intimacy, in this marriage where God was present and focused on, we both discovered that oral stimulation was really not as intensely desirable as just being face to face, loving and singing and being filled with joy. Being face to face and setting aside the oral stimulation was a powerful thing. I discovered that whereas earlier in my life, before I'd been immersed in water and spirit, the oral stimulation was so important. But then, later, in the God atmosphere, the oral stimulation really did not hold that much value. It was more important to be face to face and to sing and to pray together. I remember taking time to thank the sweet one and say, you know, there's so many people that we know that don't get to enjoy what we're enjoying right now. And we would just ask you, for each one of these people, please give them contentment. Please, if it's your will, lead them to a person of their own that they can enjoy. I don't know why we have this comfort and this wonderful thing for ourselves. Please go to the other ones that don't have this pleasure that we have. So, all of these things feel quite important. But let's move back to the most important thing, which is true ecclesia, true connectedness with heaven, is the gathering of at least 2 or 3 family men and their families in order to admit our callings, in order to admit our responsibilities that we might be avoiding, and in order to admit our habits and choices and habits and practices that are not the best thing. So if you're a father or a father and a mother, it feels very important to have conversation about these areas that are very, very super powerful, that can catch you and cause you to be caught in obsession a lot, as I was for nearly 40 years. So conversing about these things and being cheerful and realistic is very important. Especially, it's clear, it's obvious. Let's celebrate weaknesses. Celebrating our weaknesses is actually honoring Yeshua, honoring Messiah. Okay, well, you got a male human being, and it is much more easy to stimulate a male human being than it is to stimulate a female human being. And so if we don't get really real and say, hey, male human being has a weakness, and we need to care about that, and we need to talk about that. Are you being caught in your weakness? Female human being has a tendency to want to look in the mirror and wonder if she's accepted, acceptable, desirable, approved. She's wondering if she's getting approval from the people that look upon her. And there's a weakness in that, wanting to have family commitment, wanting to have honor and respect and words of appreciation. So it's time for us to celebrate our weaknesses and be truly bold. If Rav Shaul is saying he celebrates his weaknesses, well then I would argue that he has to declare, remember, boys and girls, I am male human being, and male human being definitely has a weakness because that extension of his is very easy to stimulate. And so let's check in with the men and the women and discern whether anyone is getting caught in obsessions. Now, when I was training, when I was 36 years old, training how to say no to the arousal and the physiology, when I was training, the wise elder person said, consider every 8 days being together with your person. That way, 1 week you're together on Tuesday, but then the next week you're together on Wednesday, and the next week you're together on Thursday. And that means that you have to make every effort to put yourselves and being together first. Put that before your business, your money, and many other things. And I thought that was a really neat idea, partly because Yeshua resurrected on the 8th day. The first day of the week became the brand new era. The day that Yeshua resurrected ushered in an enormous new era where we enter the rest of God, our designer. So it's very wise to admit our faults. It gives honor to Yeshua for us to say, well, let's remember, the male human being is weak in this way, and I personally was raised in a certain way, and I have a spirit that troubles me of putting off talking about things because they put off talking about my father and my origins for 25 years. And procrastinating and putting off facing things is a spirit presence that I know that when I am weak and stressed, that's a thing that I'm dealing with. A spirit of putting off talking, a spirit of avoiding an issue. So let us be really fresh and clear and celebrate our weaknesses so that we can best care for one another. We're not admitting our weaknesses or celebrating our weaknesses just out of like shame and fear, etc., etc. It's so that we can care for one another. It's so that we understand one another and can truly care for one another in our weaknesses. That is a marvelous thing. Peace be with you. Be courageous and have the conversation. Did you ever describe to your children how you first got aroused and what that was like? Because many, many people end up discovering arousal because someone else has invited them into it, and because someone else may have given oral stimulation. So if your children understand, number one, the concept of the oral stimulation, and number two, if they understand that you don't want to get caught in that kind of practice where you're sharing arousal with someone that you're not in covenant with. You don't want to get into that practice because it can bind unclean spirits to your life. So if you talk about these things, we're going to talk about sex and we're going to talk about spirits, because greed and wanting to be successful, because being bitter and having a justification for revenge, there are many, many emotions, outbursts of anger, many, many different things can actually rise up and begin to control your responses and behaviors if you're not vigilant and celebrating your weaknesses. Yay! This is truth, this is insight, this is help that was never given to me, and I am trying to be the one who gives a better way.